Hey guys, Tim with Little Crow Gunworks. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to do a deep dive on ladder testing, and I'm going to take you out to the range and show you the conditions and equipment we use to shoot the ladder test for this series, and show you a little bit of that. Basically, me shooting the gun and my position and the equipment we used, and about the timing and how much time I leave in between shots and how I cool the barrel, and show you guys all the conditions of that for those of you that are curious and asking a lot of questions about the testing conditions. And then I'm going to show you a little video clip of some of the target results, and then come back to the desk here and get into a big deep dive, a big data deep dive on what we're looking for, how much you can glean from that 10 to 15 shot test that I discussed in the last two videos. And then after that, we're going to transition to talking about group size and how shots disperse on target, and we're going to involve the sample size police and kind of give the devil his due there, but then also kind of put a spin on that and hopefully change the way you guys look at that. Those of you that are Hornady sample size disciples, maybe change your mind a little bit about the way you look at things, maybe not, we'll see. And then we're going to spend some time looking at the actual ladder test metrics and results for the ladder test we shot in this series, the group sizes and vertical and extreme spread and point of impact location, all that stuff. And then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about extreme spread and the different trends that I've noticed over my lifetime of shooting and chronographing loads, and what I think really goes into that, like what the main contributing factors are that go into that to getting a decent extreme spread. We're not going to talk about why that's important, just basically the trends that I've noticed over time. And then at the end we'll put a bow on it and show you guys what areas of charge weight I picked as the winners, and which areas of charge weight we were going to pursue further and do seating depth tests and that sort of thing. So a lot to pack in this video. It's going to be long, but first I'll take you out to the range and show you the conditions of the testing, and then we'll come back and do the deep dive. Alright, we're out here at the 100-yard range, ready to start shooting our ladder test with our 175 grain Sierra Match King and IMR 4895. You remember when we were out testing loads to see what we wanted to break the barrel in with at long range, IMR 4895 shot a 5-shot group that was around like a ½ inch, and it was kind of near the top of the pressure ceiling, so I'm kind of loading just above that and then loading down to see if there's anything that maybe shot any better, if I can at least with that charge weight I did test see how forgiving it is and how wide the charge window is before it falls apart. So we're using the same seating depth that we did to break the barrel in, and we're just going to start by shooting I think I got 15 different charge weights in 0.2 grain increments, which is kind of a small increment for a case this size, but if I have the components, I like to be a little more thorough, again, just to kind of see how wide that charge weight window is. And then there's some other things that I'm looking for when I shoot a test like this, so I'll explain that once we have the results. But I'm going to get started here. I think I'm going to do everything round robin, so I'll shoot one of each charge weight, and then I'll probably put the camera down there and shoot the remaining charge weights, and maybe do a time lapse and fast forward that so you can kind of see that. And then we'll review how it went on my desk like we usually do. Oh, and I'm shooting off the my Accutech bipod. This is the last time I shot with the Thoroughfare. It was a little bit springy on the concrete. When you're out in the field and it can actually kind of sink into the earth, it's great and it's super stable, but I did notice on the concrete it was a little more springy than I like, so I'm going to be shooting, when I'm here on the concrete, I'll be using this Accutech bipod. First velocity 25.94. Obviously the brass looks good, everything's good there. Chamber chiller going and my stopwatch will probably allow, it's a little cooler today, but I'm going to shoot this whole test in one string and it's 45 shots. So I'll probably allow maybe a minute and a half between shots and maybe take a 5 to 10 minute break after each row of 15. That should keep the gun from getting too heat soaked, and also not favor any of the charge weights, and that should help us get good solid data. First shot's a little bit off my point of aim, but probably not enough to worry about, so I think I'm just going to leave it where it is and shoot the entire test, hopefully without adjusting the scope, so that way we can see the trends and it's easier for me to explain to you what I look for. What else? I think that's about it. Get the next one down the road here. Almost identical point of impact. And very similar velocity. What I was going to say is I'm trying to show you guys my process every step of the way and not really skip anything. So what I forgot to say at the beginning here was that I haven't shot this gun since we were at the farm breaking the barrel in. So the last time I shot it was those 14 shots or 15 shots or whatever it was at 1,000 yards. So this is the next time I'm out shooting it. I knew the zero was going to be close, loaded up my ladder test, and here we go. So right here, now keep in mind I didn't adjust the scope at all. I started down here. Notice the trend here. So we're a little bit high and left, about the same. Starts dropping down, back up, same, roughly the same. Then it starts moving away, right on the bullseye. Upper right, just above, a little high and right, a little high and left, straight up. So the most consistent part of this was basically right here, and then it went to the center and then kind of the same place. So the fact that this hit the orange dot could just be the random dispersion of the group size, but right now if you made me pick a spot, I would pick between here and here, or between here and here. But we'll see once we get more shots on there. You know, it's kind of like from there to there, these 4 charge weights in a row. Looks like it's going to be the most forgiving, consistent place, but we'll see how we shake out. All right, so let's start out by talking a little bit about the trend we were seeing on the target there, just after one shot. So that's basically, you know, what we spent time talking about in the last 2 videos, that 10 to 15 shot test that I came up with. That's basically what you're going to see if you took those 10 to 15 shots and shot them each at their own point of aim. So this is what I've noticed, because I've been doing this round, I've been testing round robin like that for a long time. And what I noticed in all my ladder tests, regardless of the gun, if I had a gun that shot small, what I would see was, as I'm shooting round robin, I would notice that you'd get to a certain area of pressure or charge weight or velocity, however you want to look at that. Like I said in the last video, they're kind of interchangeable. You get to a certain point and all of a sudden sequential shots would hit in the exact same place, even though there's a different amount of powder in there. And I noticed that trend over time. So then I thought, well, what if I just load one shot of each and shoot them all at the same place so the shots actually overlap? And then I can see, like, okay, how happy is this combination, and how, kind of what area of charge weight are the bullets all going to hit in the same place? And that's where I'll spend more of my time testing, rather than just doing 5 to 10 shots of each charge weight and trying to do large sample sizes of every combination. I kind of use this as a way to spot trends and as a way to pick out, like, okay, where is this thing going to want to shoot? So I think we'll fire up our screen recording here and get going. 3, 2, 1, and we're live. Okay, so again, this was the visual aid that I used in the last couple videos, and that's what I noticed, is that when when I would shoot round robin and the sequential shots would hit in the same place, I thought, okay, well, I can get, like I said in an earlier video, pretty low resolution but fairly accurate data on what powder in general is going to perform well. When I showed this test in the 7mm Showdown series, I had a few people losing their minds because it was, oh, this method is garbage. What can one shot of each charge weight possibly tell you? Well, in my experience, it can tell you where the gun's going to want to shoot, and you guys will see that as we go through here. All right, so we see, as we talked about, just after one shot of each, the first shot kind of gave me an idea of where it was going to want to be, right? So keep in mind, I said in the video it was going to be somewhere in here, and we'll see where we land at the end. All right, so now I want to spend a little bit of time talking about group size and how shots disperse, and where I think a lot of you guys are going awry is that, this series of videos about ladder testing, the last couple and this one, are really, I understand that they're really, for most of you, completely throwing everything you thought you knew up in the air. And for those of you that had inklings about these things, it's kind of giving you reassurance or confirming maybe some of your suspicions that you had. But when we look at this, if we just look at let's say we just look at the top row, and you look at the different charge weights that produce the different size groups. Now, the biggest red flag for me, knowing what I know, is that the point of impact location change is the biggest red flag for me. And you go, okay, well, why is that? Because you have some, pretty bad groups in that top row. You have one good one okay, and then one not so good and one terrible. And you go, all right, well, why isn't that your primary concern? And it's because group sizes differ. I talked about this in the 7mm Showdown series, but we'll expand on it a little more here. Now, what you guys have to keep in mind is that here's where we give the sample size police their due, is that, what Hornady was talking about in their your groups are too small videos, is that if you take a 3-shot group or even a 5-shot group, that's not an adequate sample of the overall performance of a given combination. It's just a very small sample. It's not statistically relevant. Well, the long and the short of what they were saying was the more shots you take of a given combination, the better the data. And I agree with that to a point, and we'll expand on here as we go along. But basically the gist of it is that you guys have to realize, like, the way I test, I'm looking for trends, right? So because I use 3 and 5 shot samples most of the time, and sometimes 1 shot just to figure out my powder, I'm looking for trends. I'm not looking for definitive anything. So like when I went out and shot this test that you guys are looking at now, and I shot that 65.6 grain charge and shot a 1/2-inch group, that doesn't mean that that's going to do that all the time. And I know that. That's why I don't get too fired up about it. I'm more so concerned, like, where is this thing going? Like, is it moving around? Because I know that it shot a 1/2-inch group that time, but if I take it out again, it might look like the one above it, the one below it, or the one on the end. Like it could look like any one of those. So I'm more concerned, like, I know the group size is going to change every time I come out. Is it going to be in the same place? Like, at least if it's in the same place every time on average, I can tolerate it being a different size. But I can't tolerate it being a different size and being somewhere else, every time you take it out. That's useless. So, I guess to dive a little deeper, what some guys don't realize, is that the way this works, and basically what the Hornady guys were trying to get at, is that the way shots disperse on target is a bell curve. This is a standard bell curve, right? So I put these minute of angle marks on the bottom just as a reference. So this ladder test that we were just looking at, this ladder test, not the point of impact shift, but just the group sizes are fairly accurately represented by this bell curve. What does that mean? It means that if you have a given combination, let's say that 65.6 grain load that shot a half-inch group. Well, in reality, because of the average group sizes across the whole test, what that load is probably really capable of, even though those 3 shots shot a half-inch, if you took that out and shot it many times under different conditions, what it's really capable of is more like this, where this is how this works. So 68% of the time, it's going to shoot between 0.7 MOA and 1.1 MOA. Now, that would be within one standard deviation. Now, the amount of the standard deviation can change, and also what the average, group size is can change greatly depending on the combination you picked, combination of cartridge, bullet, powder, other variables, the rifle itself, the quality of the rifle, the barrel, your shooting ability, like everything that contributes to what the gun can produce goes into this bell curve. Everything, all of it. Even if you, took yourself out of it and shot it off a bench, this is still how it's going to work. Like if you put it in a vise that just held the rifle, didn't touch the barrel, so it's not messing with the harmonics, and you just used a string to gently set the trigger off, or however you did it, it's still going to do this. Even if you take you out of the equation, it is still going to produce this, meaning 68% of the time it's going to shoot a group 3 or 5 or whatever shot between 0.7 and 1.1 MOA. And then 13.5% of the time it's going to be between 1.1 and 1.3. And only 2.5% of the time it's going to be bigger than 1.3. Likewise, going the other way, 13.5% of the time it's going to be between that 0.5 and 0.7 MOA, which is likely this group right here, 65.6. So it's likely only going to do that 13.5% of the time. And 2.5% of the time it'll shoot smaller than that. So almost never. And this is basically what the Hornady guys were getting at, is that if you do a small sample size, like 3 to 5 shots, it's not enough of a sample to say, okay, this is how this gun shoots. In order to get a decent representation of this bell curve, the Hornady guys say you need like 20 to 30 shots. And the more you take, the better. The more accurate it's going to be, where you'll actually be able to pinpoint the extreme ends. But 20 to 30 shots is enough to give you this, to give you a good idea. And let's say that was 10 3-shot groups. At 10 different points of aim, you shoot a 3-shot group 10 times with however much time in between you want. And then you use software to overlay all the shots to get a grand aggregate. This is what it's going to look like, where you go, okay, well, I had a 3-shot group that was sub half, but I also had one that was 1.5, and when you overlay it all together, it really tells the full story. So this rifle in this series, the 308 that we used, did not have a bell curve like this, where it was from half MOA to say 1.3. It was more like this, where on the low side, you'll see as we go into the data, it shot some groups that were sub 0.1. I think it did more than one, but it might only been one that was sub 0.1. And then it shot quite a few that were between 0.1 and 0.3 MOA. And then some more that were between 0.3 and 0.5, 0.5, 0.7, and so on and so on. Where, like I said in an earlier video, it only shot one group that was over an inch of the 48 groups that I shot, 3-shot groups that I shot, different combinations. So that's what this rifle in this series is capable of. And I think where, Jaden Quinlan ended up talking to Eric Cortina, and they did a podcast or two together. And I think where they started to disagree was that, we'll go into this next slide. This is like, so now we're on a different slide. This is kind of like how bench rest rifles and competition rifles can shoot, where the standard deviation is so tight and the average group is so small, like short range bench rest guys that compete at the national level at 100 and 200 yard bench rest. At 100 yards, this is how their 3-shot groups are, where the average is like 80 thousandths, sub 1/10 of an inch. That'd be like the average. And depending on the conditions and the gun and, whether they have a Hummer barrel or an average barrel or whatever, their guns shoot preposterously small. And I think this is where those guys kind of were at loggerheads, because Cortina knows this, and I'm not saying Jaden doesn't, but anyway, I don't want to derail too much on their disagreement, but just know that basically your system, your ability, the conditions, all that, the gun, the quality of the barrel, your reloading consistent, like everything that goes into it contributes to this, and there's nothing you can do about it. So this is where, like, it's a pet peeve of mine when somebody says, oh, this size group, it'll do this all day long. Well, you don't know what you're talking about. This is how it works. Now, maybe you want to feel like it'll do this all day long. It really won't. It's gonna, if you shoot enough, this is how it's going to distribute. And you'll be able to figure this out on your own, how your gun shoots if you throw enough data at it. But I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, just so you guys know that, and drive home the point that I don't want you guys to get over-invested in the actual group size that a given combination shoots, because it varies. Like, it's going to vary. So, if you have a certain combination and one day it shoots a 1/4 inch, and then it shoots 3/8, and then it shoots a 1/2, and then it shoots a 1/4 again, and then it shoots 5/8, and then 3/4, and then back to a 1/4, there's nothing wrong with that gun. That's just the way it is. Nothing has changed. There's no problems. Like, it doesn't mean the load's junk. Like, that's going to happen. So you guys need to accept that and stop getting hyper fixated on, well, what size group did it shoot? Because that really doesn't matter, and it's going to change. Just what we're looking for is, on average, we want it to trend, to whatever your criteria is. If you're just trying to get sub MOA, as long as it shoots sub MOA and the average point of impact isn't moving around every time you go out, then that meets your standards. So you got to set your own criteria for yourself. All right, so now we'll go into all the data for this ladder test. All right, so there's a lot on here. I'm going to scale this down a tiny bit just so I can stay in the lower right corner here. There's a lot here. All right, so give you guys a second to study this and look at all the data. We'll see that what we have on the top here is, these are in columns, right? So 43.6 grains produce this average velocity, this ES, this vertical, and this group size, right? So you guys can see how this works and all the data that I have on here. I thought about going through each one by one and giving them their own page, but I didn't think, like I typically do, but I didn't think that was of value, because I'm trying to show you guys the trends that we're trying to spot, what we're actually looking for, and what matters. So I thought putting it all on one slide would be the most helpful. Now, because of what we just talked about with group size variation and the fact that any one of these combinations, the group size is going to vary. Every time you take it out, it's going to shoot something different. I want you to keep that in mind as you're looking at this. So like this one, 41.8 grains that shot under 50 thousandths of an inch with 33 thousandths of vertical. that doesn't mean it's going to do that all the time. That's not a one hole load. That's just how it shot that time. So it's nice to see. It's nice when it happens, makes us feel good, but that doesn't mean it's going to do that all the time. So don't think it will. That doesn't mean that's automatically the best load, which for most people, that would be, okay, that's my load. I'm done. No more testing. And then the next time you go out, it doesn't shoot like that. And you're like, wow, you're all upset, not realizing that, you know, it's not going to do that every time. So keep that in mind, that as you look at this, that how it shot one time doesn't mean that's how it's going to do every time. We're looking for trends. Another thing that you should keep in mind too is I have the vertical and the group size on here. So where's a good example? Up here, 42.8 grains. You see this charge weight. Shot pretty wide. Shot an 806. So that's the size of that group, 0.806 from here to here. Well, another thing you guys have to keep in mind, when you start to get a system that shoots pretty small, what you have to remember, and the bench rest guys, the competitive bench rest guys will tell you this as well. Even at 100 yards, wind plays a factor. How much? Well, for this cartridge and this bullet at the velocities that it's capable of pushing it, 10 miles an hour of wind variation. So let's say I took these first two shots for this 806 group. These first two shots were when the wind was blowing 4 miles an hour, right? And then this last one, that's about a half inch away. That's about 8-10 miles an hour difference. So if I shot that third shot during a gust, that's how far it's going to move. Not even counting the dispersion that we just got done talking about. So let's say all the bullets were headed for the same hole, like this 41.8 grains. 10 miles an hour wind will move it that far. So you guys got to be conscious of that during the conditions that you're testing. That's why I've said in previous videos and previous series, I can't even tell you where or when, but I know I've said it, is that I don't get too wrapped up in any one group. And I don't go and try to test during perfect conditions. I go out, like, I've goofed around and tested on days where it was blowing like 40, but if it's just an average, you know, blowing 8 to 10 or 8 to 12 or something like that, I go shoot. I don't worry about it, because I know no matter what my best laid plans are, the wind blows and it's going to have an effect on the group. So that's why I don't get too wrapped up in how wide the groups are. I care way more about the vertical. So knowing that the group sizes can vary on their own just due to natural dispersion, and you can get some horizontal component due to wind. Keep that in mind and look at this, and then consider how good this thing shot. So I mentioned in I think it was the last video that our first two lower charge weights, according to Gordon's reloading tool, did not have 100% burnt propellant. Is that why I think these are necessarily the biggest and tallest groups on here? Maybe, maybe not. It's probably a contributing factor, and then also a contributing factor is the natural dispersion, like I talked about. Also, one thing you should notice too is that if you look at all the extreme spreads on here, the worst extreme spread is the second charge weight. Now, one of the best ones is the lowest charge weight. So you can't necessarily say, and we'll go into this, the extreme spread trends. We're going to talk about that in this video too. So then we see as we go along here, what I want you to look at is not so much the group size, but look at the vertical. Because I'm a long range guy, that's what I care about. Because when we're shooting at long range, the vertical and trying to keep your bullets near the center of the target, we need to control that as much as we can, because the biggest factor is the wind. So we want to be able to kind of set and forget the vertical part and only have to focus on learning to read the wind. So in my experience, what I found is in order to have something that shoots really flat at long range, a huge contributing factor is how flat it shoots at 100 yards. I wasn't sure when I was going to let this cat out of the bag, but it's got to happen sometime, so now's as good a time as any. when it shoots flat at short range, I've found that that translates. And it's not necessarily it has to shoot flat and it has to have it as low a ES as possible. It's more, in my experience, I found it's more so about how flat does it shoot at 100. And then I found that that translates. So if we look at our vertical as we go through here, we're looking, like I've said before, we're looking for forgiveness. Well, where do we get some really good forgiveness as far as average point of impact location and vertical? Right through here, right? Where else? Okay, so then we go up to the top row. Vertical goes up a little over a ½ inch, starts to come back down. Oh, here we go again. A nice little window there. I think before we put a bow on that, I think we'll start by talking about, or we'll pivot here and spend a little more time talking about the extreme spreads. So if we look at this, we see on average, just at a glance, you can see that the bottom half of the ladder test, the extreme spreads on average are higher than the top half. Why is that? Here we go. This has to do with powder selection. And this is why I select powders the way I do and why I have the criteria that I have that we reviewed in detail in the powder selection videos, where we spent a bunch of time on Gordon's reloading tool. In my experience, what I have found is that, like when we were talking about the 308, we talked about how the powders that were in gray font were ideal burn rates for this combination. And the powders that were faster, that were in orange, were too fast, meaning they can still work. They can still shoot really small, but you don't have necessarily optimal case fill, and usually you're not going to achieve maximum velocity. You know, where that powder pressures out and hits max pressure is going to be, the velocity is going to be slower than an optimal powder. And then I was ragging on one thing that many, I'm going to say most people are doing that reload, is using a powder that's way too slow for their application and stuffing the hell out of the case in an effort to try to get some velocity that's not realistic for the combination they're using. And now we're going to talk about the trends that I see with that, where sometimes if you can get enough of the powder to burn, that will achieve higher velocity than an optimal powder, but there's side effects. And now we'll go into that. So if we look at this slide, we see that just what I was talking about, where if we take all the extreme spreads of the bottom row and we add those together and divide by how many there are, the average extreme spread for the bottom half is 24. Okay? And if you eliminate the worst one, this 47, give it the benefit of the doubt and say, eliminate the worst one, it's still 20. On the top half, if we take the average of these, it's 14. Same thing. We eliminate the worst one, 30. Now it's 12. So there's definitely a difference, right? On average, the top half, where it's higher pressure and likely to be higher percentage of burnt propellant, because, like we talked about in the powder video, as you get more of it in there, the pressure goes up, and that kind of guarantees that all the powder is going to burn, as long as it's an appropriate burn rate. Whereas you start getting closer to that 50,000 psi with an optimal powder, and below 50,000, probably not all burning. And then I've also noticed too that when you start to go over pressure, even though all the powder's burning, by over pressure I mean 64, 65,000 psi, as you start to go over, we'll talk about what happens. So this is a crude graph that I made on paint, and what I want you to look at is, we were talking about the Hornady guys, and if you guys notice, we're talking about ladder tests here and low development, and I haven't said anything about velocity flat spots, right? Looking for flat spots when you do a velocity test. And that would be because I don't believe in them at all, which is why I said, a big reason why I said that the way I do low development, what I was going to teach you guys, isn't like anything else you're seeing anywhere else. is because I don't look for velocity flat spots because I don't really believe in them. And I think where guys end up landing on that, and where they end up, the reason why I'll show you the reason why they end up convincing themselves that that's a thing. So if we look at this, we see that the green line here, so this is, I guess, let's start with, this is an optimal powder, optimal burn rate, right? So in the case of our 308, it'd be one of the gray powders. This green line represents average velocity, where this is what the Hornady guys say. If you make the sample sizes large enough, what you're going to see is a straight line. You're not going to see flat spots. Well, what I've noticed over time, regardless of the cartridge, is that if you use my method to figure out optimal powders for a given cartridge and bullet combination, and it falls into that optimal category with the right fill ratio and the right amount of burnt propellant and on, this is what I've noticed, is that when you get below 50,000 psi, so we have velocity and charge weight here, right? When you have lower velocity, lower charge weight, and say sub 50,000 psi, the highest velocity represented by the red line and the lowest velocity represented by the blue line, this is what you'll see. When you get too low a pressure, your extreme spread will be high. And you can still have points where, okay, say this charge weight, the ES is really high. This charge weight, it's a little bit better. This charge weight, it's high again. This charge weight, it's better than the last time it was decent. Then we get to where the ES, the difference between the lowest velocity and the highest velocity is the extreme spread, right? We get to where it's a little bit worse, and then at some point, it gets as good as it's going to get, where the ESs will shrink for a period of a band of charge weight. You'll still get one here that's high, and it'll come back down and whatever, but on average, the extreme spread is going to be as low as it can be based on the powder and bullet and cartridge that you have, and they're not all created equal. So like optimal powder A might look like this. Optimal powder B, the extreme spread, these lines might be tighter together, and they might be farther apart on the bottom end, or they might be tighter the whole way, or whatever. So it's not a, this isn't necessarily representing like, okay, you're going to get an ES of 15 if you use an optimal powder. What the ES is going to be will vary depending on the combination you have. But this is the trend that I've noticed, is that when you get in this kind of middle pressure range, everything's just happy. That's usually where the gun shoots the best, and it's usually where the extreme spreads are the lowest. And I think that with small sample sizes, that's kind of where guys will see velocity flat spots, is their sample size is so small that, you can get a couple sequential charge weights that kind of look like a flat spot, even though they're not really. It's just your sample sizes aren't big enough. And then I've noticed that even with optimal powders, when you start to approach getting over 50,000 psi, the extreme, not only the group, but the extreme spread will start to go to shit. So this is what I've noticed, just a generic trend, but on average, this is what I see with optimal powders, where you're going to achieve the highest velocities that are also consistent. The next one, this is what I have noticed over time with the too fast burn rate of powder. So if you have a powder that doesn't have optimal fill ratio, like we discussed in the powder video, which would be like, let's say your fill ratio is in the upper 80s to low 90s, and you have 100% burnt propellant anywhere from 50,000 psi to 65 plus, that would be considered too fast. Now, those powders, the peak velocity is going to be lower by maybe up to 150 feet a second than these optimal powders will be at max pressure. However, they'll be slower, but in my experience, the average extreme spread will be much better. So you guys have to decide if that's worth it for you. But this is what I've noticed, is that on average, a powder that's too fast, if it fits my criteria, and it's one of my 36 powders, it can shoot just as small or smaller than an optimal powder, but it'll be significantly slower, and on average, the ES will be better. And you guys can probably guess where this is going. Now we're going to talk about powders that are too slow. This is what I've noticed over time, selecting powders for different situations that are considered too slow. And you can easily see this if you peruse other people's videos and you look at what they're doing and they show you the data. You guys have seen it, I know you have, where kind of seeming like no matter how much they put in there, the ES is horrible. And they can be using top of the line equipment and top of the line everything and whatever else, and kind of no matter how much they put in there, their extreme spread is 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 feet a second for 3 to 5 shots. And then depending on the powder, if you get to a point where at up near max pressure or above max pressure, like I said, because the amount of powder that burns in the case increases as you increase pressure. Well, if you actually get to 100% burnt propellant up near the very top edge of the pressure curve, up around 65,000 psi, you'll see that your ES is finally decent. And oftentimes because of that, because it's actually stable and happy, that's where it'll shoot the best too. And generally down here where the ES is horrible, sometimes it'll group well. But in general, on average, what I've found across time is that if not all the powder's burning, your ES is going to be terrible and the group sizes won't be great. Now, sometimes you can, like I said, sometimes you can have bad ES and it still shoots really small. And if you just shoot short range or hunt at short range and that works for you, fine. But just know that for a given cartridge and bullet, if you go from, say, a too slow powder like this to a too fast powder, if you just went from a too slow powder to a too fast powder, you may or may not be giving up much velocity, depending on how poorly that slow powder burns. But you might be using 20% less here with a powder that's too fast compared to one that's too slow. So if you're hunting at short range, the bullet's going to hit whatever animal you're shooting at tremendously high velocity anyway, because it's not very far away. So that any extra velocity you might have probably isn't doing you much good, but you're burning, up to 20, 25, 30% more powder because you have that much higher charge weight because it's the burn rate is too slow. So I just want to spend a little time talking about that because I don't, and those of you, if you go back through your data, you're going to see something similar to this, but this is what I've noticed across time is that optimal powders are kind of the sweet spot between velocity and stability, where the loads will be as consistent as they can be and have as good of ES as they can be and be as fast as they can be, where they're maybe not the best at any one of those things, but they're on average you're getting the most bang for your buck, I guess. Where the powders that are too fast, they can shoot just as small or smaller than the optimal powders, but they're going to be slower. And on average, the extreme spreads will be better. So you have to decide for your application and what you're trying to do with it, what's most important for you. And then I really don't think there's any situation where you should be using a powder that's too slow. I don't think it's ever a good idea. There's really no upside to me. At the very max, you might be able to get a decent group and a decent ES, and it'll do it quasi-consistently, but you might not be more than 30 or 40 feet a second faster than an optimal powder, and it may not shoot as well, and on and on. So, to me, the juice just isn't worth the squeeze to mess with these super slow powders to try to chase velocity. It's just not worth it. So now going back to our ladder test, this is where we landed for picking our winners. Remember what I said at the beginning of the data review here, and what I said at the range, how just after one shot, of each charge weight, I kind of knew where we were going to land. And that's how I developed that 10 to 15 shot test. I noticed that trend over time across tons of different guns, tons of different combinations. Like, if you get a gun that shoots reasonably small, that test can be incredibly helpful. If the gun shoots big, like I talked about with the 10 to 15 shot egg, if it shoots 3 to 4 inches for that 10 to 15 shot egg, it's pretty useless information. You're not going to be able to figure this out. But if you're using, like I said, like I showed, a powder C where the aggregate is down around an inch for 10 to 15 shots, even though, the sample size police would disagree, you guys can see this is not the first time I've done this, where I can call based on one shot of each charge weight, basically where the thing's going to want to shoot. So, but you have to have a gun that shoots small to be able to do it. So now I think what we're going to do next is we see that our lower charge weight here, this is where we want to spend more time because we have, on average, very small groups. We have 349, a 147, 49 thousandths, and a 672 with all sub 1/10 of an inch vertical across all three, and our average point of impact location is nearly identical for all of them. And really the group size is, like I said, some of that is just natural dispersion and some of it's wind. So the fact that this put 2 in the same hole, like this 42 grains, the fact that it put 2 in the same hole and then spit one over here, that doesn't mean anything to me. Nothing at all. What I care about is how short the group is. It's because it's super short, 37 thousandths. Almost no height variation at all. That's what I care about. And the fact that across charge weights, it does it the same. So based on what we talked about in the last video, this is going to give me about 75 degrees temperature-wise of forgiveness. Might be more, might be less, depending on the conditions and the conditions of the barrel and on. But this is a nice, wide, forgiving area to test and pursue further. And then up top here, same thing. This is up top near the top of the pressure band. I think this 43.6 grains was, according to GRT, around that 62,000 PSI. So this is up near the top in the upper 50s, low 60s kind of area. And this, I think, was down in the low 50s, 52, 3, 4, 5. And I've noticed that too across a lot of guns. If you guys watch the 22 Nosler series, I noticed the same thing too, the same trend where there'll be like a slow load and a fast load. There'll be one area of charge weight near the bottom end of the pressure range and another one up near the top where it's going to want to shoot. You usually get 2 spots like this if you have a combination that's happy and an appropriate powder and on. So this area up top here, we're going to pursue further. So the next test, what we're going to do is, okay, now we have an area of charge weight or temperature forgiveness or pressure, like I said, however you need to look at those as all the same thing. We have one area that's consistent here and one area that's consistent here. Then what I decided to do after this was go, okay, now we know our 2 general areas of pressure that want to shoot well. Let's play with seating depth, longer and shorter, just to figure out, make sure that we're in a good spot there too, and see if, because we started at 20 thousandths jump, we need to figure out, does this combination want to be a little bit closer to the rifling or a little bit farther away? So we'll go into that next, where we took one of these faster charges and one of these slower charges, and we shot the same seating depth test with both of them. We'll see the results of that, and then we'll talk about where we go from there and why. So there's a ton of data here. We're already creeping up on an hour, probably 50 minutes or better for the video, so I don't want to get too mired down. I'm sure you guys are going to have some questions. Again, please put them down in the comments. There's a lot here. I could get lost in this for a couple hours and just talk in circles, but I don't think it's of any value. What I want to do is get you guys, again, in a new mindset of thinking about the fact that groups differ, as every time you go out and shoot, it's going to be a slightly different size. That's totally normal. What you should be worried about is, like I talked about in the previous videos, when you shoot these ladder tests, don't mess with the scope. Pick a spot that you think all the shots are going to stay on the paper, and then shoot the whole test without touching the scope. And shoot it round robin and all that for all the reasons I explained in the previous video. And then you'll be able to spot these things and see if these trends exist with the combination you picked, or if maybe you need to try something else. So I just want to get you guys in the mind frame of thinking about, like, okay, where is the average point of impact location? Where does this thing look like it wants to be stable, and where does it look like it's going to be forgiving? Don't be hyper fixated on, you know, the smallest group and whatever, because if I went out and shot this test again the next day or the next month or whatever, the group sizes are all going to be different. Now, the trends will still be there. The average point of impact location and what areas of charge weight shot super flat and shot minimal vertical, that'll still be the same, I've found. But the group sizes are all going to be different. So don't get hyper fixated on group size and start worrying about adjacent charge weights and what they're doing. And again, we're looking for areas that are forgiving. So I could ramble on forever, but I'll cut it here. Again, back to seating depth on the next one. Like, subscribe, share with your buddies, all that good stuff. We'll see you next time.